You know, let's face it, the weak link of security in our organization is most often going to be the end user and application security. And I got some bad news for you, but you're an end user. I'm an end user. The CIO of your company is an end user. The CEO of your company is an end user. So this is a category that pretty much relates to everybody in the organization. What we're going to look at here in this particular nugget of the Security Plus series is several key areas of application security that CompTIA wants us to look at as we look at some of the most major vulnerable areas, as well as a quick view of how we're going to mitigate against some of these vulnerabilities. In this nugget, we're going to look at concepts like ActiveX plugins. We'll talk about Java and its vulnerability, scripting on the client side. We'll look at web browser cookies. We'll talk about XSS, a cross-site scripting security vulnerability as well. We'll address buffer overflows and how these are typically from denial of service attacks. That should be DOS, not DOD, Department of Defense. SMTP open relays. This can be a vulnerability when you install that Exchange server out of the perimeter of your network. We'll talk about the very popular and prevalent, that's not what P and P stand for, popular and prevalent, but it stands for peer-to-peer file sharing. Things like Kazaa and Morpheus, that's invading our organization. Instant messaging, also another security hole from the application side. And then, of course, email phishing, one of the main threats that we have in email applications. So we're going to look at 10 key application security areas that you should know about as a security professional. And of course, this isn't an all-encompassing comprehensive list here, but it is the list that you need to know for your Security Plus exam. The first technology I want to talk about here is ActiveX. This is a Microsoft technology that's been implemented in its browsers for several years now. And ActiveX presents what are called controls or little scriptlets or applets which allow you to kind of customize the web experience, extend and enhance the web experience beyond just basic HTML. It allows you to customize these controls, icons, features, and just basic usability of web-enabled systems. Now, ActiveX is going to run on the client side, and historically, it's been kind of a huge vulnerability in Internet Explorer. However, in IE version 7, we've got some extra features in there. For example, IE7 has what's called ActiveX opt-in. What you see down here is just a little development of an ActiveX control that can be embedded into a web page. Anyone who's designing ActiveX control should follow Microsoft guidelines for secure design principles. Now, the technology or the method that Microsoft uses for security is called Authenticode. Let me just jot that down here. Authenticode. And as I mentioned before, Authenticode kind of leverages certificate technology, certificate authorities that allow ActiveX components to be validated by a certificate server. So since these ActiveX components are going to be downloaded to the hard disk on your user machine, this is going to open up your machine to huge security breaches. So you want to make sure that you configure your web browser so that they require confirmation to accept an ActiveX control, and then hopefully you're only going to download one that's been authenticated by the Authenticode process of Microsoft. So, bottom line for the Security Plus exam is this. If you automatically accept ActiveX components or ActiveX controls that can be introduced by scripts or scriptlets, it's going to open up security breaches on your client system if that control is used. Why? Because an ActiveX control has programming instructions that can also have embedded malicious code or code that can exploit vulnerabilities on your system. Let me give you an idea of some of the control you have over ActiveX, and we go into a Microsoft IE browser. If I go up to the Tools area, I can see I've got this Internet Options. I'm going to click on that, and we're going to go to the Security tab of the Internet Options of our browser. This is IE7, and you can see we've got these preset zones that I have some custom settings for. If I go to Internet and choose Custom Level, I can go in and as I scroll down, I see certain areas, and this is again added functionality to my browser. For example, you can see here the .NET Framework, which is also going to add functionality through XAML and XPS, other .NET Framework components. We're not talking about .NET right now. We're talking about ActiveX. You can see quite a bit of area here for ActiveX controls and plugins. And you've got different options where you can disable or you can enable or you can ask it to prompt you. For example, I might want to prompt whenever there's a scriptlet, an ActiveX scriptlet that comes up. I might want to go ahead and enable prompting for ActiveX controls. This is the recommended behavior. And if you scroll down here, you can see, do we want to download signed ActiveX controls? Let's go ahead and prompt. Now, again, signed typically means that they're signed by a certificate authority, but not necessarily. In the dialog box that pops up, it'll show you who is signing it. Also, it's recommended that you disable unsigned ActiveX controls. These can be some of the most dangerous ones. So you can see that you've got on your browser in IE7 quite a bit of functionality to control from the end user side how ActiveX controls are handled. Now I can do this, I can manage this through group policy that I mentioned earlier in this series, through group policy on a client by client basis. I can also get some control like I can with Java, for example, that we're going to talk about here in a second, in JavaScript, by using intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems. Those are some mitigation techniques we'll talk about a little bit later on in this Nugget series. So again, in the security settings option under Internet Options, the security tab in IE, I have the ability to control this. Now, Java is a full-blown programming language. It's a full-blown platform of applications, as a matter of fact. It includes things like the Java virtual machine, the Java runtime environment, Java runtime engine it's also called, and a bunch of other languages that use Java. For our purposes here, we're concerned with Java applets, small chunks of code, small applications that can be run on embedded devices, mobile phones, and web browsers to provide improved functionality when browsing the World Wide Web. That's what we're concerned about. Now, for these purposes, Java's been around for, almost 15 years, since 1994, when it was introduced into the web browser called Mosaic. Hot Java and the Java platform was kind of brought out in 94 and 95. So it's been around quite a while. Typically, to use Java applets on your browser, you'll be prompted to download the Java Runtime Environment or the Java Runtime Engine, JRE. Now, technically speaking, Java applets are downloaded to clients and they run in what's called a sandbox, which is technically a safe area. These are restricted areas of memory, and the sandbox limits the applet's access to user areas and system resources. So it's considered safe. It won't try to get access to sensitive system areas. However, there can be errors in the Java virtual machine that runs the applications, and some applications can run outside of the sandbox. Also, renegade applets can be unsafe and perform malicious operations. So it's possible, again, through the browser to disable Java applets and JavaScript from running. Now, JavaScript, even though the word has Java in it, is really now unrelated to the Java platform. We'll talk about JavaScript here in a second, but we need to understand from a Security Plus standpoint that Java applets can allow attackers to create or exploit unsafe Java applets, and therefore many organizations may, at a firewall level or other area of the network, will actually block Java applets and other types of scripting from being run inside of the network. And we'll talk more about this later, but this can be done with intrusion detection services and intrusion prevention services. We can do what's called application firewalls to keep these Java applets from running in our organization. So that may be one of the solutions that your company decides to do because of rogue Java applets. Now, going back to my IE7 browser, if I go to Tools here, we can see I've got a Sun Java console installed, and you can see the version of the Java plugin that I have. I'm using Java Runtime Environment version 1.60_07, the Java plugin version, and other information that I can do here to kind of manage that Java environment. Also, if I go back under Tools to Internet Options, I can see if I go back to Security again and we take a look at that customizing of the level, if I scroll into the bottom here, I should be able to see under the scripting area, do I want to enable the scripting of Java applets, which I'm allowing to I can either disable it, enable it, or prompt. I can also control this through group policy in my organization, or I can control this through intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems. Now, when I mentioned Java applets, I mentioned the Java virtual machine, and that brings up a topic that will most likely appear on your Security Plus exam, and that is virtualization technology. This is an exploding area that allows you to kind of run these virtual sandbox environments on a machine. For example, on my Toshiba laptop that I'm using right here, I've got a pretty beefy laptop. I have 4 gigs of RAM and a pretty fast processor. So I can use virtualization technology. Let me go down here and just show you, like Microsoft's Virtual PC, and open that up. And I can see what I've got here is I've got a couple of virtual images. I've got a domain controller image. I've also got a domain controller running Microsoft Office SharePoint 2007. Now, I typically wouldn't be able to run this entire Windows 2003 domain controller with its DNS servers and DHCP servers and SQL 2005 databases and MOS 2007 on this laptop, okay? But I can have a virtual environment and I can run it within this kind of sandbox. I can have multiple virtual PCs running or virtual servers. And if I have enough memory, enough resources, I can run these simultaneously. Now, you might be asking, where's the security aspect of this? Well, using virtualization as a client software does introduce some access control securities that haven't been conquered yet in your environment. So it's quite likely that your company's not going to allow these kind of virtual machines to be downloaded from servers and run on workstations yet because of the intricacies of running with access controls, let's say permissions and user accounts stored in, let's say, a directory service like Active Directory. Also, another security issue with these is the fact that this allows me to get unlicensed copies of software and typically run these over and over and over again. It also allows me to run software that should be run on certain hardware, for example, on a laptop. So, if Microsoft sells Windows Server 2003 or Windows Server 2008, and they are also expecting you to purchase certain hardware to run that on, I can kind of get around the rules that way. So the real security issues with virtualization right now come down to copywriting and licensing issues, and integrating your end-user security, Active Directory permissions and rights and user accounts in an effective way with these virtual machines that can just be pretty much installed on workstations and then just blown away and reinstalled. So I wanted to mention this virtualization technology to you. Microsoft's Virtual PC is just one product out there. VMware, VMware, is another product out there that offers this virtual machine technology. And this is something you might need to be aware of for the Security Plus exam. Now, the next topic I want to talk about is that of scripting, and I've already been referring to kind of the source of scripting already. As a matter of fact, ActiveX controls can be written through scripts. There's JavaScript. There's other scripting languages that can use Java platforms as well. There's Perl scripting that's been around for a long time. Scripts are just simply small chunks of code or applets that are designed to deliver functionality. Typically, a script is not a full-blown application or a full-blown program. It provides extended functionality to a program or an application. As you can see down here, here's a particular function that is a script that provides additional functionality. Now, there's all different types of scripts, and there's some that are very popular, especially when it comes to client security. For example, for quite a long time, CGI scripts have been around for a long time. These are client-server activities. You've got these scripts that are stored on World Wide Web servers, and these scripts can be run on the clients to provide functionality. For example, for a long time, whenever you would go up to a website and fill out a form, for example, and put information like your name and your email address and your home address and phone number, signing up for something or purchasing a product, you were using a CGI script. The problem is CGI scripts have been historically buggy and have been insecure. They present security holes. They might intentionally or unintentionally leak information about that client system that's filling in the form, for example. That's going to give hackers information they can use to break into the client system. Also, scripts that are processing this remote user input, let's say like that form I mentioned, or a searchable index command, these are also vulnerable to attacks if the remote user kind of gets tricked into certain activities. So we need to understand that CGI scripts are potential security holes. Something you see used a lot now is JavaScript. JavaScript has been very active in kind of replacing CGI, along with other things like PHP. PHP is also a scripting language, and all these scripting languages, of course, they kind of have their own ins and outs. They all have their own slight vulnerabilities. JavaScript, however, is considered a little bit more secure. JavaScripts can't read or write files on users' computers. They can interact with other pages inside of FrameSet, okay? And that's okay, but only if those web pages originate from the same website. If they originate from another website, they can't be done. JavaScript can't access cookies, which we'll talk about here in a second, or variables from other sites. So there's a lot of things JavaScript can't do to kind of keep it more secure. So these scripting languages, you need to be aware of them, that they have security holes in your organization. If you're going to be using scripting on your web servers, you want to make sure that your developers and your web administrators understand that if they're using CGI or JavaScript or PHP, they need to be aware of all of the security vulnerabilities in those particular scripting languages. Well, since we're on the topic of scripting, let's look at one of the most popular exploitations found out there on the internet. And that's cross-site scripting, or XSS. As a matter of fact, XSS is accountable for over 80% of the documented security vulnerabilities, and it's found in web programs that allow code injection, and malicious users will do this by placing it into web pages viewed by users on the internet. This can be HTML code and client-side scripts. It's also used to manufacture very powerful email phishing attacks and browser exploits. From the user standpoint, the attack is pretty much transparent. However, in the background, things like unauthorized access, privilege escalation, data theft, and possible financial loss are in the cards for the susceptible end user. Now, these XSS attacks are usually in markup languages like HTML or XHTML, but you'll also see them in JavaScript and JScript, Microsoft's ActiveX, VBScript, even Adobe's Flash or ActionScript, which it uses. There have been a bunch of XSS attacks since the 1990s, a lot of them on websites that you're very familiar with. Things like MySpace and Facebook and Google, Yahoo, Netscape, the government NIST website, National Institute of Standards and Technology, the RIAA, Recording Industry Association of America, even Wikipedia. So this is a really, really major threat. Now there's three different categories, three different kinds of XSS vulnerabilities. You've got DOM-based or Type 0 XSS, which is based on the standard object model or document object model. With this, the problem's going to happen in the page's client-side script itself, like a JavaScript. Non-persistent is type 1. This is the most common type. These will show up when data is provided by a web client and it's used immediately by server-side scripts to generate a page of results for the user. And what happens is nefarious users will use a little bit of social engineering to convince a user to follow a malicious URL, which is going to place code into the results page, giving the attacker full access to the page content, and hopefully they can get that user, well, from their standpoint, to input important financial or personal information. The persistent type is a type 2 XSS vulnerability, and this is a very powerful kind of attack. This is when data is offered to a web application by a user and it's first stored persistently on the server, let's say in a file system or a database, then it's later on displayed to the user in a web page. This happens like with online message boards, for example. As far as the exam's concerned, just kind of be aware of the power and the prevalence of XSS cross-site scripting. Now, an honest question is, how do we get rid or how do we mitigate against these XSS cross-site scripting? If it's such a huge problem, what do we do to prevent it? Well, one way to prevent it would be to just eliminate scripts altogether. So I guess we'll put as the first way to mitigate is the most obvious one, is that's don't use scripts. So write web applications to operate without the use of client-side scripts altogether. As a matter of fact, many browsers can be configured to disable client-side scripts on a per-domain basis. And we do this with IE with the security zones. And we've alluded to that security zone area already in the interface, so security zones. For example, let's go back to Internet Explorer here. We'll go to the Tools area, Internet Options, and we'll go to the Security tab in the Options dialog box, and I'll go down here to Custom Level. And we can see as we scroll down here into the Internet Zone Security Settings, we've got a whole category of scripting. Let's just get down here and we'll see right there. We've got a whole scripting category where we can disable active scripting, we can disable programmatic clipboard access, we can disable status bar updates via scripting, we can allow websites to prompt for information, we can disable scripting of Java applets. So we have that capability within our newer web browsers. I'm using IE7. This capability has been around for several versions of IE, I think as long as IE version 4. So keep that in mind as far as your mitigation goes. Another way to mitigate against CSS is also a concept that's expected as one of the objectives on the Security Plus exam, and that is a concept known as input validation. The exam wants you to know what this is, and basically input validation is a good way to mitigate XSS. In other words, the form will accept some field which is supposed to contain a certain amount of information, a phone number, for example. And the server-side routine could remove all of the characters other than, let's say, the digits and the parentheses and the dashes for that phone number, so that the input cannot contain any scripting information. That way you can mitigate by validating the input in the form on the web page. Input validation also helps to mitigate against SQL or SQL injection as well for web pages that use SQL or SQL databases on the back end. Another way to mitigate is through the use of cookies. As we know, cookies are little text files that are stored on the hard drive of the individual user. It can be used for tracking their web movement through the websites, through the web directories. It can be used to kind of give the server an indication of the types of preferences, web surfing preferences, for example. And cookie security can be used for mitigation of XSS attacks. A lot of web applications use session cookies for authentication between the HTTP requests. So what they'll do is, to prevent XSS from exploiting these cookies, the web app will tie the session cookie to the IP address of the user. And I'll just put one here for example, which is an private address, but it'll tie it to the user who logged in, so it only allows that IP address to use that cookie. And this can be very effective in a lot of situations. So this is an ongoing struggle, the SSS attack, cross-site scripting, but several ways to mitigate would be eliminating scripts, input validation, and cookie security. Well, way back in July of 2000, there was a vulnerability to what's called a buffer overflow attack that was found in the very popular Microsoft Outlook and Outlook Express. A flaw in the programming made it possible for a malicious attacker to actually compromise the integrity of a target workstation by simply sending it an email message. Now, this wasn't like the usual email virus. Users couldn't protect themselves by not opening an attached file. In fact, the user didn't have to open the message to allow the attack to happen. The program's message header mechanisms had a defect that made it possible for senders to overflow the area with extraneous data. This is a buffer overflow attack. And next to XSS, it's the second most popular client attack out there. So a buffer overflow is going to occur when a process or a program attempts to store data in a temporary memory data storage area called a buffer, and it tries to store more than the buffer was intended or designed to store. Buffers are only generated to contain a finite amount of data, so this extra information has to go somewhere, so it can overflow into adjacent buffers, it can corrupt or overwrite valid data held in those buffers. It could damage user files. It could send instructions to other areas of the computer. So a buffer overflow is an increasingly common type of security attack on data integrity. Bottom line, the malicious attack can force the application to receive more data than it's expected to receive. The program can terminate, or it can write beyond its memory addresses and again cause all kinds of problems, overwriting data, introducing malicious instructions, leaving the system vulnerable. Now, a buffer overflow can be intentional or unintentional. It can actually be malicious code, or it could just simply be a program error. As I mentioned, that buffer flow that occurred back in 2000 with Outlook and Outlook Express was simply a programming flaw that created a vulnerability that could be compromised or exploited. A couple of examples of worms that exploit buffer overflows are the Code Red worm and the SQL Slammer worm. Next, we have the SMTP Open Relay. SMTP is the Simple Mail Transport Protocol. And an open relay, which is also referred to as an insecure relay or a third-party relay, is basically an SMTP email server or service that's going to allow third-party relay of email messages. Now, realize that in itself, this is not necessarily a bad thing, okay? For years in the past, open relays were intentionally used to facilitate mail relay between different closed email systems like UUCP or FidoNet to allow network admins to debug mail connectivity issues and route mail when problems occurred. However, as the internet has expanded enormously and grown, SMTP relays are now notorious for being leveraged by spammers who hijack open relays and basically just launder their spam through these SMTP servers. They deliver unsolicited email while spoofing their identity to make their messages look like they come from a legitimate source when they actually don't. So, in itself, an open relay is just simply an email server that allows third-party relay of email messages. Again, this can be allowed on public SMTP servers on a ad hoc or an as-needed basis. It can be controlled. However, it often happens unwittingly on SMTP servers exposed to the internet by corporations where malicious senders use them to send large volumes of spam as they relay off of their SMTP server. As I mentioned, the server owner who has misconfigured this is often unaware that their SMTP server is used as an open relay until their domain shows up on the MAPS, or a blacklist of open relay servers out there, and you really don't ever want that to happen. Now, if you're using Exchange 2000, 2003, or even the newest version as of this recording, which is Exchange Server 2007, there are mitigations and techniques built in to prevent open relays when you expose your SMTP server to the public internet. And this MAPS blacklist, MAPS, but you can go do a search on this, it's no longer available. It was an open organization, but it's now owned by the security company Trend Micro. Now, what happens when you allow your system to be an open relay and you allow large amounts of spam to be sent off of your server? Well, it can lead to system crashes. It can even lead to equipment damage and loss of business or goodwill out there in the public. The financial cost when a spammer hijacks a server can actually bring down an organization. And again, you don't want to end up on that mail abuse prevention system blacklist. So what you want to do is you want to rely on the mitigation and the features that are built into your modern server email systems, like Exchange, for example, that allow you to prevent your system from becoming an SMTP open relay. Next, let's talk about the very popular peer-to-peer file sharing, phenomenon. You can see what I've got here. I've got the logo for Morpheus up here, and here's Kazaa, very popular tool for sharing off of your hard drive with the world, audio, video, images, documents, and software. Most of it pirated, as a matter of fact. It's a very popular concept, but it can cause all kinds of legal and disk space problems as well as network bandwidth problems for your organization. So it's a security vulnerability in many regards. There's other programs out there like eMule and BitTorrent as well to basically use this concept of making every node on the inner network that's part of this service its own server. And again, as I mentioned, the problem is it's often a copyright infringement aspect that causes legal problems for your organization. As end users try to use peer-to-peer file sharing programs on their corporate computers, they're also sucking up a lot of bandwidth by downloading DVDs and CDs and music files and video files off the internet. Another problem is when you download files or you install programs like this, and I haven't got any of these installed on my system because my mama didn't raise a fool, and I don't want to have these spyware programs on my system. You're also downloading, a really fantastic program or an exe file, but what you've also got involved with that as well is many times adware and spyware, or possibly Trojans or backdoor viruses and worms on your system. So you don't want to use these peer-to-peer file sharing programs on your corporate network. And we can use firewalls and intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems to kind of keep a lookout for those. Firewalls can block out certain ports that these programs can use, but they can dynamically use ports as well. So intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems can help us out in that regard. You also want to have in your written security policy, it should say flat out, you do not use and install P2P file sharing products, and there should be some type of enforcement there as well. Also, be cautious of the software that you would download on your home computer. Okay, it can cause instability on your network operating system. It could also introduce viruses or Trojans into your computer, as well as annoying spyware or adware or other programs that are going to hijack your browser and try to send you off to other sites. You also want to be careful if you're going to use these programs on your home system. Be careful what you share. Okay, many users will just unwittingly designate the root C drive as their shared files folder. This allows everybody who's in this P2P network to basically see and access everything on their hard drive, which includes critical operating system files. You also want to make sure that any of these programs you download are going to be subject to any type of antivirus scanning that you're doing. Any anti-adware, anti-spyware, antivirus software should also be scanning these programs that you're installing. Again, install these at your own risks. Again, you may be violating copyright laws and things like that. You need to be aware of the power and security aspect of P2P file sharing. Alrighty, next let's talk about instant messaging and the threat it can be to your corporate security. Now, I could take you in and demo my Windows Live Messenger, which is my instant messaging client, but I'm not going to do that because I've got a lot of friends who have their particular profiles, and they're showing as their personal message next to their name, well, their last name and their phone numbers, and I don't really want you to see that. So I just took a screenshot and kind of whited out some of the privacy information. But you can see I've got different individuals and their status. They're away or they're busy, they're online, they're offline. I've got some that I've stored but I'm not active anymore. Now, why is instant messaging a threat? It's a threat in a two-pronged way. Number one, it's a threat to productivity, number one. Individual users can spend a lot of time during the day doing instant messaging and a lot of the other fun things that go along with instant messaging here, and it can really cut into productivity. Now, that's just an opinion, and it varies from organization to organization. The main threat, however, is that instant messaging by default sends the information in clear text. You can also use these programs to send files. You can send files and maybe get around existing policies for file access and access controls. I can also use this to view webcam and other information as well. And the problem is it's productivity and it's clear text. Now, if my internal organization is using, let's say, an IPsec implementation where all of the data is being encrypted, or over my VPN it's encrypted, well, that's one thing. But remember, by default, instant messaging programs are clear text. So whatever you send, any personal information you might write down in that instant message, it could be hijacked, or it could be sniffed off the wire or over the wireless RF with a wireless sniffer. So this is a huge vulnerability, a huge threat to privacy information. Also realize that a lot of the IM programs that are out there, like the ones from AOL and other vendors, have a lot of other utilities and tools bundled along with them, and that can introduce additional spyware and adware to your system. So you need to be very careful there. You can see you can download additional little kind of applets and Googlets and other kinds of little things you can have on your system. Those little extra programs and add-ons can offer other security vulnerabilities besides just a lack of productivity and clear text traffic. So you want to be careful. Some organizations simply in their security policy will not allow instant messaging within the organization. It uses particular TCP and UDP ports, so they'll simply block those at the firewall or a proxy and not allow instant messaging either throughout the organization, or they'll only allow instant messaging within the organization and won't allow it to go out, so that I can't instant message outside of my organization. Now, I use instant messaging as a remote contractor, and I've got to have it. It's a lifeline for me, but I'm very careful about what type of information I put in my instant messages. I don't put personal information. I don't put phone numbers, SSNs, that kind of stuff as well. I don't want to be subject to any type of lack of privacy or identity theft, so I'm very careful with my content of instant messages, and you should be too. The last topic we're going to look at here in application security is that of phishing, and phishing, P-H-I-S-I-N-G, is not a new thing. But in the last year or few months, it's increased exponentially because it's just such a lucrative area for malicious attackers. They create these lookalike websites to mimic legitimate companies like PayPal, for example, or financial institutions, Citibank, Bank of America, whatever, and they send them emails and they bait or lure people into providing usernames, account information, social security numbers, any kind of confidential data that can be used to steal their identity or to get other type of information to get access to their financial records, credit card information, credit card accounts, and bank accounts. So for example, this is a legitimate customer service email, but a company might mimic in this particular HTML enabled email a website and allow me to go in and put in input information and then allow me to go and have my personal financial data stolen. And you can see here that by default my security is blocking certain pictures because by blocking these graphic files it prevents senders from identifying my particular computer, and I can click here to download pictures. So if I get email from a bank or Travelocity or PayPal or some hotel chain, I can make sure it's a proper email. Now one way you can usually tell that you're getting some phishing site is if you click on a particular hypertext link and it'll look like a valid link, but down below in the status bar down here you'll see that sometimes this is going to some totally random or some other domain name or some variation of the domain name. For example, I know if I do my banking through Citibank, for example, if I move my mouse over this, the URL will be something like mycitibank.net or citibankus.info. It'll be some spoofed domain name that's sending you to a nefarious site. So some of the things about phishing, and you want to instruct yourself and your end users, is you really want to avoid ever, and you can use your security suite to help you do this through the privacy features, you don't really ever want to click on hypertext links that you get in HTML email. You want to be very careful if you're getting email from financial services or banks. Banks and financial services are going to use other methods to direct you to important information. You'll either get a call from a customer service rep or they'll do it through the mail. They're very careful about sending any kind of information through the internet. And so you want to be very wary of anything that asks you to go to a web page and update your account or put in personal information or some change to some status. Always go to the customer service phone number of your institution, of PayPal, of whoever it is, and verify before you go to a website and put information in there. It may take a little bit longer, but don't fall victim to a phishing attack. Phishing scams and fraudulent email will show themselves a lot in social networking sites. My font's a little bit too big here. Let me fix this a second. Social networking sites like MySpace or Facebook. Be careful there. Any kind of fake websites that want donations for charity. That's a very common phishing attack. If you've got a website that spoofs a familiar site with a slightly different address, always be very careful, as I mentioned, to look at the web addresses. Make sure that they're legitimate. One thing you might want to do is you might want to go right now to your own favorites, the places that you go to on a regular basis, and maybe document the legitimate web URLs of your online banking, your online brokerage firm, all of the things that you do that are legitimate, the sites that you go to on a regular basis. Go up and document what those legitimate sites are, and then maybe have a record of that somewhere so that you can refer to that when you get email. Again, this goes back to instant messaging, but be wary of information that comes through your instant messaging program, AOL Messenger, for example, as well as information that might come over your cell phones or other mobile devices. That's a very prevalent and common phishing attack, as to use the exploding mobile device. Phishing scams rely on placing links in email messages, so I wouldn't follow any link from an email message, but they can also be on phony websites. Okay, so you have to watch the links that are on websites. Make sure that if you're at a website, and this has happened to me, I've been to websites that look almost exactly like some particular vendor that I'm a member of, or a social networking site, and you know what? You look closely, and it's a scam. There's also a form of phishing, and this is really dangerous, but it's called spear phishing. And spear phishing is actually a targeted form of phishing where the email message looks like it comes from your employer or from a colleague. Again, these people can get information about you. They get your employer information. They find out who your bank is. They can find out from your address book your colleagues' email messages. So they can spear phish you messages from, let's say, the head of human resources or somebody in IT. Highly targeted scams trying to get information out of you. It may include official-looking logos and information taken from your employer or your bank, things like that. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get personal data. They're trying to redirect you to a website or maybe phone numbers where you're going to call and you're going to give personal information to somebody who's an expert at social engineering. So just keep that in mind. One last thing, for example, if you look at the URL, okay, and it looks like something legitimate, the text, the blue underscored area might say something like, I'm just making this is just an example, but let's say citibank.com. I'm just using this. But then when you move your mouse over it, what shows up down in the status bar is what you'll typically see is like an actual IP address, okay? Some kind of IP address information. I'm not going to put real numbers here. Something that has nothing to do with what's actually in the hypertext link itself. So that's another thing to look out for. Be wary of phrases like verify your account, phrases like you have won the lottery, things like if you don't respond within 24 hours or if you don't respond within 48 hours, your account will be closed. Things like click the link below to gain access to your account. If you see anything like that, then just be careful. Look for URLs that it slightly transpose the name of the company. For example, it might not be Microsoft, it might be Microsoft, M-I-C-O or M-I-R-C-O. Be very careful of those types of things. I've got IE7 and I've got Windows Vista, and actually has a phishing filter built in that scans websites for me dynamically and will alert me to phishing sites. So one of your main mitigation features is just be knowledgeable of phishing, be suspicious, and use phishing filters built in to your browsers. All right. Alright, in this CBT Nugget we looked at several areas of application security. This isn't all of them, but it's the ones that are expected that you know for the Security Plus exam. We talked about ActiveX and Java, JavaScripting, scripting, XSS, we talked about cookies and input validation, looked at buffer overflows, SMTP open relays, peer-to-peer file sharing, instant messaging, and finally, phishing. I hope this CBT Nugget has been informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing. We'll see you in the next Nugget.